Before we start tonight, pour yourself something warm, get settled in, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Small town, big city, driving home, or already in bed, I want to know. Now let's begin. Some doors don't close so much as they wait, propped just wide enough for the right person to find their way back through years later when they finally stopped pretending they meant to shut them. My name is Hank Whitfield. I'm 44 years old and I live in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky. On 2 acres I'm still paying off a little at a time, the way you pay off anything that matters, slow and without complaining about it. I build things for a living. Cabinets, porches, the odd staircase when somebody in town finally gets tired of the one that's been creaking since Eisenhower was president. I learned the trade from my father, who learned it from his, and some mornings when I run my hand along a piece of oak before I cut it, I think I can still feel both of them standing behind me, waiting to see if I do it right. My truck has 190,000 miles on it. The air conditioning quit 2 summers ago and I never got around to fixing it, mostly because fixing it would mean admitting I mind the heat and I don't like admitting things like that. My knee is the same way. I went off a roof in Bardstown 8 years back, landed wrong, and it's never once let me forget it. Cold mornings it talks to me before my alarm does. I've learned to listen to it the way you listen to an old man complaining. You nod, you let him finish, and then you go on and do the thing anyway. Cedar Hollow isn't much to look at if you're just passing through. A main street with a hardware store, a Baptist church, a diner called the Depot that's been open since before I was born, and a Kroger out on Route 9 that counts as the big city excitement around here. But it's mine. I know every pothole on the road out to my shop and every one of them knows me back. There's another thing I don't talk about and it's older than the knee. 11 years ago, I let a woman walk out of my life because I was too proud to tell her the truth about where I stood. I told myself it was for her own good. I told myself a lot of things. What I never told her was that I loved her enough to be ashamed of what I couldn't give her, and shame, it turns out, is a poor substitute for honesty. It just looks similar from a distance. I hadn't said her name out loud in years. Not because I'd forgotten it. Because I hadn't. That Thursday my knee was bad, my coffee maker was worse, and I had exactly one thing on my calendar that mattered. I'd finished a cabinet for the diner downtown, the Depot, the only place in Cedar Hollow that still serves breakfast past 11, and I was due to deliver it and hang it myself before the Saturday morning crowd came through. It was a simple job. 6 feet of reclaimed pine, dovetail joints, nothing fancy. I'd built it in my shop over 3 weeks of evenings, sanding it smoother than it needed to be, the way I do when my hands need something to do and my head doesn't want company. I loaded it into the truck bed Thursday night and told myself Saturday morning would be an easy morning. I did not know yet who would be standing behind the counter when I carried it in. I saw her Friday, the day before the delivery, in the produce aisle of the Kroger on Route 9, and for a second I forgot how to hold a bag of onions. I hadn't seen her in 11 years. She was standing there in a green work apron, still in her shoes from a shift, comparing 2 heads of lettuce like the last decade hadn't happened to either one of us. June. She looked up before I could decide whether to say something or turn my cart around like a coward, and there wasn't a version of that moment where I came out looking graceful. She went still. I went still. Somewhere behind us a stock boy dropped a case of something and neither of us flinched because neither of us was really in that store anymore. Hank, she said like she was testing whether the name still fit in her mouth. June. Mine fit fine. It always had. That was sort of the problem. We didn't talk long. 2 minutes, maybe 3, made up mostly of the kind of small talk people use as scaffolding when they don't trust the building underneath it. Her father, my shop, the weather, whether the Kroger had finally fixed that shopping cart with the bad wheel. She told me she'd moved back to town in the spring. I told her I still lived out past the Baptist church. Neither one of us mentioned the 11 years like they were a door standing wide open between us, which they were. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. There were faint half-moons under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back quick and practical instead of the way she used to wear it, and her apron, a different apron, a work apron, not the Kroger's, was still tied at her waist like she'd come straight from somewhere else without stopping to change. She caught me noticing and pulled her cardigan a little tighter across herself, a small defensive motion I remembered from years back, the one she did whenever she felt seen more than she meant to be. "You're staring," she said not unkindly. "You look like you haven't slept." "I own a diner shift and a father with a bad heart," she said like that explained everything, which it mostly did. "Sleep's a luxury item these days." I wanted to ask more. I didn't. 11 years doesn't earn a man the right to ask a woman why she looks tired in a grocery store, not on the first meeting back, and I'd learned enough by 44 to know the difference between curiosity and a right to know. She left first. I stood by the onions a while longer than a man needs to. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay there doing the math on it. She'd moved back in the spring, it was nearly fall, and in all those months our paths hadn't crossed once, in a town small enough that everybody's path crosses everybody's eventually. That told me something. She'd been avoiding the same places I frequented, or I'd been avoiding hers, or maybe we'd both just gotten good at not looking too hard at anything that might still hurt. The next morning, Saturday, I loaded my knee into the truck along with the cabinet and drove into town to the depot, same as planned, not thinking anything of it, because I didn't yet know she waited tables there now. I carried the cabinet in through the back, and I heard her voice before I saw her face, and my hands went still around the wood like they'd been asked a question they weren't ready to answer. She came around the corner with a coffee pot in one hand and an order pad in the other, and when she saw me standing in the kitchen doorway with 6 feet of pine on my shoulder, something crossed her face that wasn't quite surprise. It was more like she'd been braced for this and it had come anyway. "You built that?" she asked, nodding at the cabinet. "Every board of it." She didn't say anything else about it. She went back to work and I went back to mine, and for 2 hours we moved around each other in that small kitchen like a couple of dancers who used to know the steps and were both too proud to admit they remembered. I finished hanging the cabinet a little after 1. The lunch rush had thinned out. She came to clear my table. I'd ordered coffee and pie I didn't want, just to have a reason to stay a while longer and watch her work, and she set the check down in front of me the way she must have set down 100 checks that week, quick and practiced. Except she didn't walk away. She leaned down, one hand flat on the table, close enough that I caught the smell of coffee and dish soap and something underneath it that was just her, unchanged after 11 years, and she said it low, like she was confessing something to herself as much as to me. "I get off at 9. She straightened back up before I could answer. She didn't say it like an invitation. She said it like a woman who'd been running on fumes for months and had finally, without meaning to, said something true out loud to somebody who might actually hear it. I didn't laugh. I didn't make it into something clever. I just looked at her, and something in my chest did a slow, careful turn, like a key finding a lock it hadn't tried in a long time. "Okay," I said. That was all. That was enough. She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. By the end of the week, I'd learned 3 things, mostly from the parts of town that still talk. Her father, Wendell Bragg, had taken sick that spring, bad enough that she'd left a life 2 states over to come sit with him. Her marriage down there had ended sometime before that, quiet and without much fuss, the way some marriages end when there was never quite enough holding them up. And she was working 2 jobs, the diner by day and the hospital gift shop 3 nights a week, because Wendell's medical bills didn't care how tired she was. I didn't know all of that yet, standing in the depot with a check in front of me and her footsteps already halfway to the kitchen. All I knew was that a woman I'd loved and lost had just handed me the truest thing she'd said in months, without meaning to, and I had exactly 9 hours to figure out what I was going to do about it. I spent most of those 9 hours pretending to work in my shop, running a board through the planer twice when it only needed it once, my mind circling back to the sound of her voice leaning down close to my ear. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from being handed the truth by somebody who didn't mean to give it to you. It sits different than an argument. It sits like a debt you're glad to owe. At 5 minutes past 9, I pulled into the gravel lot behind the depot, and she was already outside, apron off, arms crossed against the evening chill, looking like a woman who half expected me not to show and was trying hard not to let that show on her face. "You came," she said. "Told you I would." "People tell me things," she said, climbing into the truck without waiting to be asked, the old vinyl seat creaking under her the same way it had 11 years ago. "Doesn't mean much anymore." I didn't argue with her. She'd earned the right to be careful, and arguing with a woman's caution is a fool's way of trying to earn her trust. So I just drove and let the quiet between us do the talking it needed to do, and somewhere past the second stoplight in town, her shoulders came down half an inch, like she'd been carrying something up near her ears and had finally set part of it down. I picked her up at 9:05, which she informed me was late, and I told her a man doesn't rush the last few minutes of 11 years, and she laughed for the first time since the produce aisle, a real laugh, short and surprised out of her, like it had gotten rusty from disuse. We didn't go anywhere. We sat in my truck in the depot parking lot with the engine off and the windows down, and she told me about Wendell, how sharp he still was some days and how far away he went on others, how the house needed a ramp built for the wheelchair the doctor said was coming whether Wendell agreed to it or not, how the bills had started arriving in envelopes with windows in them, the kind that mean business. I listened. I didn't offer to fix anything, not that first night. I'd learned that much, at least in 11 years, that a woman telling you what's broken isn't always asking you to be the one who fixes it. Sometimes she's just asking you to hold still long enough to hear it. That Sunday, I drove out past the Baptist church, turned the other way for once, and found myself parked outside Wendell Bragg's house without entirely deciding to be there. June came out onto the porch when she heard my truck, arms crossed, not unhappy to see me, just wary the way a person gets when they've been let down before by folks who meant well and then disappeared. "I'm not here to be fixed," she said. "I'm not here to fix you," I said. "I'm here about the ramp." She looked at me a long moment. Then she almost smiled. "He's stubborn about it. Doesn't want to admit he needs one yet. Most men don't want to admit what they need until it's already built and they're standing on it." I said it lighter than I meant it, but she heard the second meaning under the first one anyway. She always had. That was the thing about June, she'd never needed me to spell anything out. It was probably why I'd been able to hide from her for 11 years without her ever once believing my excuses. I measured the porch steps that afternoon while Wendell watched me from his chair through the screen door, saying nothing, missing nothing. The following Tuesday I came back with lumber. Wendell came out onto the porch on his own two legs, slower than he used to be but steady enough, and stood over my shoulder while I worked, the way old men do when they want you to know they could still show you a thing or two if their body would let them. "You're the Whitfield boy," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." "You're the one broke my daughter's heart 11 years back." I set my level down on the porch rail and looked at him straight because a man like Wendell Bragg doesn't respect you for looking away from a true thing. "I am," I said. "I've spent 11 years knowing it too. If it's all the same to you, I'd like a chance to be something other than that to her, if she'll have me." Wendell studied me a good while. Somewhere behind the screen door I heard June go quiet, listening. "Well," Wendell finally said. "Finish the ramp first. Talks cheap. Would costs money." That was as close to a blessing as I was going to get, and I took it. He kept talking while I worked, though, the way old men do when they've decided you're worth the breath. He told me about his own daddy, a coal man who never once said he loved anybody out loud, who showed it instead in cords of split wood stacked neat against the winter and boots resoled without being asked. "Bragg men don't say it," Wendell said. "We just make sure the roof don't leak on the people we love." Took my late wife 15 years to believe I meant something by it. "My daddy was the same," I said, setting a nail. "Never told me he was proud of anything. Just left his good level in my truck the week before he passed, no note, nothing. Took me a year to understand that was him saying it the only way he knew how." Wendell was quiet a moment. "You planning on saying it the plain way to her? Or you aiming to leave levels around and hope she figures it out?" I didn't have a good answer for that yet. I just kept driving nails, and Wendell let the silence sit there like he'd planted something in it on purpose. which, knowing him even that early, he probably had. By the end of that week, the ramp was done, sturdy enough to hold a man twice Wendell's size, and June had started letting me stay for supper afterward, the two of us and Wendell around a kitchen table that had clearly seen better, fuller years. One of those evenings, Wendell turned in early with a headache, and it left June and me alone in the kitchen with a sink full of dishes and a silence that felt different than the ones before it. Closer, somehow, like the air itself had shrunk a size. She washed. I dried. It was about as ordinary a thing as two people can do together, and it undid me completely. "You always did dry wrong," she said, watching me stack a plate the way I'd always stacked plates, rim down instead of rim up. 11 years and you never fixed it." "Some things aren't worth fixing," I said. "Some things you just get used to." She went quiet at that, her hands still in the soapy water, and when I glanced over she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, somewhere between amusement and something a good deal more dangerous to both of us. The kitchen light hummed overhead. Outside, a screen door somewhere down the road gave its familiar tired sigh, and for a second neither of us moved, close enough in that narrow kitchen that I could feel the warmth coming off her arm where it nearly brushed mine. "You smell like sawdust and pine," she said, quiet, almost to herself. "You smell like dish soap and coffee. Same as 11 years ago." "Some things you just get used to," she said, echoing me, and there was a smile underneath it that made my chest go tight in a way that had nothing to do with my knee. I didn't kiss her that night. It would have been easy. The kitchen was small, she was close, and every nerve in my body was arguing in favor of it. But some things are worth waiting on until they're ready to hold their own weight, and I didn't want the first time to happen because a sink full of dishes had made the room too small for two careful people. So I finished drying the last plate, said goodnight, and drove home with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way, replaying the sound of her voice saying "same as 11 years ago" like it was a piece of music I couldn't stop humming. It was during one of those suppers, a week later, that the trouble showed up, in the shape of a man named Denny Overcash, who let himself in through the screen door without knocking, wearing a golf shirt that had never once seen a golf course, and a smile I distrusted on principle. "Evening, Wendell," Denny said, and then to June in a voice too smooth for a kitchen. "Just came by about the offer. Bank called again about the back taxes on the place. My offer's still good, better than good, considering." June's whole body went tight. "Denny, we're eating. I can wait." He looked at me like he was pricing me out along with the house. "Didn't catch your name." "You didn't ask," I said, and went back to my supper. He left a business card on the table on his way out, like a man planting a flag. June stared at it after the door shut behind him, and I watched something old and tired settle back onto her shoulders, the same weight I'd seen in the produce aisle. "He wants to buy the land out from under Daddy," she said quietly. "Says it'll be gone to the bank in 6 months anyway if we don't sell first." "He's probably right." "Probably isn't always," I said. She looked at me like she wanted to believe that and didn't quite trust herself to. Wendell pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "Man's been circling this place since I got sick," he said. "Like a buzzard that learned to wear golf shirts." "He went to school with me," June said, tired. "Always did think persistence counted as charm." "Does it?" I asked, and she almost laughed, which was the point. "Not on him," she said. "Not on anybody really, unless the thing underneath it is honest." She looked at me a beat too long when she said honest, and I understood I was being weighed against a debt I hadn't finished paying yet. I didn't say much else that night about Denny Overcash. There wasn't much use arguing with a man like that from a distance. Men who show up with business cards instead of casseroles usually need to be answered with something more solid than words. I just filed his name away the way you file away the location of a nail that's working its way up through a floorboard, and told myself I'd deal with it before somebody stepped on it barefoot. That Thursday night, Wendell fell reaching for a coffee mug on a shelf he shouldn't have been reaching for, and June called me at 11 at night with a voice stretched thin as wire, asking if I could drive them to the hospital in Bardstown because her own car was making a sound she didn't trust. I was dressed and in the truck in 4 minutes. The waiting room at that hour smelled like bad coffee and floor wax, and June sat hunched forward in a plastic chair with her hands laced together so tight her knuckles had gone pale, and I sat beside her without saying much, because there wasn't much worth saying yet. I just put my hand over both of hers and she let me, and that alone told me more than a week of conversation could have. "He's going to be fine," the doctor said eventually. "A bruised hip, nothing broken," though the words this time hung unspoken at the end of that sentence, and June heard them same as I did. In the truck on the way home, somewhere around 1 in the morning, she finally let some of it out, quiet, staring out the windshield at the empty road. "I keep waiting for the day it isn't fine," she said. "And I don't know what I'd do on that day. I don't know who I am if I'm not the one holding all of this up." "You don't have to be the only one holding it," I said. She didn't answer that. But she didn't argue with it either, and for June in that particular season of her life, not arguing was its own kind of answer. The next Saturday evening, I found her out on the porch swing after Wendell had gone to bed, the chain squeaking the same 3-note complaint it had probably been making since Eisenhower, same as my staircases. I sat down beside her without asking, which 11 years ago I never would have dared, and we sat there a while in the kind of quiet that isn't empty, just full of things neither person's ready to say yet. "I used to think you left because you stopped loving me," she said finally, not looking at me, looking out at the yard instead. "Took me a long time to figure out it might have been the other way around. That you loved me too much to let me watch you struggle." I didn't answer right away. My knee ached in the cold coming off the evening, and I let it, because some things you don't get to talk your way past, you just have to sit with them until they're done talking to you. "I was 23 years old and drowning in debt from my daddy's shop," I said. "I couldn't offer you anything but a truck that didn't run right and a 2-acre plot the bank half owned. I told myself letting you go was the decent thing. Truth is, it was the scared thing. I've had 11 years to learn the difference." She turned her head then, and in the porch light I could see her weighing that against everything else she knew about me, old and new, and something in her face softened by degrees, like a fist slowly opening. "That's the most you've said to me in 11 years, she said. 11 years is a long time to save something up." She smiled, a small, tired, real smile, and reached over and took my hand where it rested on the swing between us, and neither of us said anything else that night. We didn't need to. Her thumb moved once, slow, along the side of my hand, tracing the old scar there from a table saw that had gotten the better of me back when I was younger and less careful, and the small, deliberate attention of it did more to my pulse than it had any right to. I watched her face in the porch light, the way her eyes stayed on our joined hands instead of meeting mine, like she wasn't ready yet to let me see everything that was sitting behind them. "Hank," she said so quiet I almost missed it under the crickets. "Yeah. I'm not saying I'm ready. I'm just saying I noticed that you're still," she stopped, searched for the word, gave up on finding a safe one. "That you're still you. Just steadier." "I noticed something too," I said, and left it there because some sentences do more work half-finished than they would whole. Her hand stayed in mine until the porch light drew moths and Wendell's television flickered off through the window, and when I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the truck, close enough in the dark that I could feel the warmth radiating off her, close enough that leaning down those last few inches would have been the easiest thing I'd done all year. I didn't. I set my hand briefly against her cheek instead, felt her breath catch under my palm, and made myself step back before either of us did something we weren't finished being ready for. "Good night, June." "Good night, Hank." Her voice had gone rougher than usual, and it followed me the whole drive home, my knee aching and my chest doing that same slow, careful turn from the diner, except deeper now, like the key had found most of the lock and was only waiting on the last, most stubborn pin to give. The following Wednesday, I caught her watching me from the kitchen window while I worked on the barn roof, and when I looked up and caught her at it, she didn't look away fast enough to pretend otherwise. She just lifted her coffee cup in a small toast and went back to whatever she'd been doing, and I nearly put a nail through my own thumb, distracted, grinning like a man 20 years younger than his knee. Something was building between us that neither of us was saying out loud yet. Not quite ready, both of us circling the same truth from opposite directions, waiting to see who'd get brave enough to close the distance first. I caught myself, more than once that week, standing in my own shop holding a tool I'd forgotten the use for, thinking about the exact color the evening light had turned her hair on that porch. A man my age ought to know better than to lose track of a chisel over a woman's hair. I didn't know better. I didn't much mind not knowing better either. She noticed. Neither of us said anything. The bank's letter came on a Wednesday, and by Thursday, June had made up her mind to sell. I found out from Wendell, who called me from the porch phone in a voice gone thin with something between anger and grief. "She's meeting over cash tomorrow morning," he said. "Says she's tired of being somebody's charity case. Tired of watching you patch up a sinking boat for free out of pity." "It isn't pity," I said, already reaching for my keys. "Tell her that. I've tried." I hadn't seen her in 3 days by then. 3 days of her answering my calls short and polite, 3 days of a silence that felt nothing like the good kind we'd shared on the porch swing. This was the old kind, the kind I recognized from 11 years back, the kind that meant a person had already started building the wall before they told you they were building it. I should have gone straight over the first night the calls turned short. I told myself I was giving her room. Truth was, some of the old fear had crept back into me too. The fear that if I pushed, I'd be the reason she ran, same as before, and I'd rather lose her slow than lose her because I'd been careless with what little trust we'd built back up. But Wendell's voice on that phone told me room wasn't what she needed anymore. She needed somebody to close the distance before Denny over cash closed it for her. I drove out there faster than my truck or my knee much appreciated, and I found her on the porch steps in the dark, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, staring at nothing in particular, which is a look I recognized because I'd worn it myself for 11 years. "Don't," she said before I'd even gotten the truck door shut. "Don't try to talk me out of it, Hank. I can't keep doing this, watching you show up here every week fixing things you don't owe us, waiting on some version of me that isn't drowning. I sell the land, Daddy's debts are clear, and you get to stop feeling responsible for a family that was never yours to carry. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked on it just slightly, the way a board cracks right before it gives. Not broken yet, but close. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man building ramps and swinging by for supper because he can't say the thing he actually means, same as 11 years ago. I can't do that again. I can't spend another decade being loved in secret." That landed the way a true thing lands, hard and right where it needed to. I stood there on the bottom step, close enough now that I could see her breath fogging faint in the cold, close enough that the porch light caught the wet shine at the corner of her eye that she was too proud to let fall. "You said something to me at the depot," I said. "You set that check down and told me you got off at 9. And I've thought about it every day since because it wasn't really about the time. It was the first honest thing you'd let yourself say to anybody in months. You were tired of waiting for something true, and so was I. I'm done waiting, June. I'm done being careful with something that matters this much." She went very still. "I love you," I said. "I loved you 11 years ago, and I was too proud and too scared to say it when it would have cost me something. I'm saying it now, when it might cost me everything, because that's the only way it counts. I don't want to fix your porch and drive home. I want the whole thing. The mess, the bills, your daddy hollering at me about my nail spacing, all of it. I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at me like she was trying to find the lie in it and couldn't, because there wasn't one to find. The porch light buzzed above us. Somewhere out past the fence line, an owl called once and went quiet, and neither of us so much as glanced toward it, because whatever was happening between us had gotten too large for either of us to spare attention for anything else. Then she came down the last 2 steps, slow, like she wasn't fully trusting her own legs to carry her there, until she was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin against the cold night air, close enough to see her chest rise on a breath she was holding longer than she needed to. Neither of us moved for a long moment after that. It was the kind of close where you can hear the other person's breathing change, where the distance between two mouths becomes the only measurement that matters in the world, and I made myself stand still and let her be the one to decide what happened next, because I'd taken that choice away from her once before without meaning to, and I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. "If I kiss you right now," she said barely above a whisper, her eyes moving from my mouth back up to my eyes like she was asking permission for something she already half knew the answer to, "I need you to mean everything you just said. Because I can survive you leaving once. I don't know that I survive it twice." "I mean it," I said. "Ask me anything you want twice over. I'll still mean it." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost something else, and she reached up with one hand and laid it flat against my chest, right over the spot where that key had been slowly, patiently turning for weeks, maybe for 11 years, and she went up on her toes. "Okay," she breathed, so quiet it barely made a sound at all, and then she closed the last of the distance herself. Her mouth met mine, soft at first, careful, like she was testing whether the ground under this particular moment would hold her weight, and when it did, when I answered her by pulling her the rest of the way in, one hand at the small of her back, the other coming up to hold her face like it was something I'd spent 11 years learning not to touch, she made a small sound against my mouth that undid something in me completely. The kiss deepened, slow, unhurried, full of all the things neither one of us had said out loud in over a decade, her fingers curling into my shirt like she was afraid I might still be the kind of man who left, and me holding on like I intended to prove her wrong for the rest of my life. When we finally broke apart, her forehead came to rest against mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere instead of just standing still, and the porch light hummed above us, and somewhere down the road a dog barked at nothing, and none of it mattered. "I'm not selling the land," she said against my mouth, quiet, certain. "Not to Denny. Not to anybody. We'll figure it out." "We will," I said. "Together this time." She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. We stood there a while longer on the bottom porch step, her hand still fisted loose in my shirt, my thumb tracing slow along her jaw like I was memorizing something I intended to keep memorizing for the rest of my life.